Well, thank you, Jake and Rhonda. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Jeffrey. It's a fantastic start. I'll try and take the baton and head down the path. You get the pilgrimage metaphor I did? Get that thing I did there too? The painting you see on the screen is The Boyhood of Sir Raleigh by John Everett Millais, 1870. It depicts a young Walter Raleigh in green sitting with his brother near the English shore and at the feet of an Italian sailor. As the sailor regales them with stories of his life beyond the horizon, Raleigh looks transfixed, terrified even. That boy would become one of England's most ambitious explorers. The painting invites us to wonder about the great explorer's origins. As Millais imagines it, the seasoned traveler gave Raleigh a vision of what lies beyond the sea. It was a map of sorts. Raleigh didn't merely hear the stories and file away the map. No. He stepped onto it, and it set the course of his life. As the sailor helped Raleigh imagine a life beyond his horizon, the scene helps us imagine the intellectual pathway of proclamation. This form of thinking is, as the Jacobsens describe it, devoted to making sense of reality, to providing a big picture explanation of why reality is as it is, and then articulating the implications for individual lives and society. The goal of proclamation thinking is to propose a map of reality that seems consistent with the best available information, but is clearer, simpler, easier to read than reality itself. Now, to be clear, the sorts of maps that proclamation thinkers offer are not for mere observation. They aren't meant to be shelved and admired. Proclamation does not simply describe, rather, it tells a story that makes data come to life. The world maps of proclamation thinking are meant to be lived. They are maps onto which we are meant to step. And it is that dimension of proclamation pathway I want to most closely engage. My paper has 3 parts. In the first, I frame proclamation thinking by considering the Jacobsens' exemplar, James Cone, Black liberation theologian. In the second, I consider how Cone illustrates the mutual dependence between the pathways of attention and proclamation. We've already seen some of the ways, I think Allison used the language of stepping on each other's toes. I think we've already got a sense of some of the integration between these pathways. Cone vividly shows us how attention must be richly embodied. Otherwise, our proclamation will be dramatically thin and inadequate. In the third and final part, I turn to the 20th century philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, Jeffrey, philosophy major, coming your way, to explore how we assess proclamations. How do we assess proclamations? Everything I do there revolves around this claim. We do not know what we believe until we see what we do. We do not know what we believe until we see what we do. I fleshed that out with 2 stories. One is Adrian Black, who renounced white nationalism. And the second is mine, how I learned what it means to believe that God cares for the poor. Part 1. James Cone, exemplar of proclamation thinking. Proclamation thinking provides, as the Jacobsens describe, hold on. Yeah, I've got a Mentimeter. If you want to just scan this real quick, I've got a question for you. When's a time in your life when some way that you were living revealed to you, showed you what you actually believe? You can do that while the presentation goes on. So if I start to you start to nod off, or you start to get drowsy, you can revive yourself maybe by doing a little typing on your phone. I won't be offended if I see you on your phone. But if I can keep you awake, you can do this at the end. So I'll allow some time at the end. This will also stay active for 2 weeks. So even as the day goes on, if you have a moment and you could offer us a little something related to this question, that would be great. A little context cue word at the beginning could be great too, just a word with a colon after it, so we kind of have a sense of what the story you're going to tell us about. And then I'll gather all these up and I'll send them to all the participants. Okay? Okay, now really, part one. James Cone, exemplar of proclamation thinking. Proclamation thinking provides, as the Jacobsens describe, a big picture interpretation of reality with implications for how to live and think. Reality is messy, so are we. So it's not immediately plain what it all means. The world, ourselves, the relations we share. Proclamation thinking tries, they explain, to dispel bewilderment by describing reality in ways that give people a sense of what their own place and meaning in the world means. Such descriptions of reality, world maps, let's call them, are not for mere admiration, but for lives well lived. James Cone knew this as well as anyone. And he also knew, growing up black in the segregated South, that America's map was badly drawn. He spent his entire career drawing a truer one. Cone published his first book in 1969, Black Theology and Black Power, which the Jacobsens summarize. It declares that the race problem confronting America and America's churches is not a black problem, but a white problem. White Americans had turned away from the gospel of Jesus, and their redemption in the eyes of God and the world require, now quoting Cone, a total identification with the suffering poor as expressed in black power. Cone didn't believe that American Christianity needed to merely reframe its theology, but rather to see differently. This is classic proclamation thinking. For Cone, and this is critical, proper seeing and understanding entails more than rational knowledge. He appeals for knowledge that is richly embodied, knowing that entails what he calls identification with the suffering poor. And in what follows, I'll try and follow Cone's lead. Part 2. Proclamation and richly embodied attention. Christian thinking is a theology of liberation, Cone writes in the opening pages of A Black Theology of Liberation, 1975. There can be no Christian theology, he continues, that is not identified unreservedly with those who are humiliated and abused. In fact, theology ceases to be a theology of the gospel when it fails to arise out of the community of the oppressed. For it is impossible to speak of the God of Israelite history, who is the God revealed in Jesus Christ, without recognizing that God is the God of and for those who labor and are overladen. 5 years later, in his landmark book, God of the Oppressed, he wrote that without liberation at its starting point, theology risks being at best idle talk and at worst blasphemy. Cone saw that too much Christian thinking originated from those who failed to identify with the oppressed. He had privileged white theologians like me in mind. But in the closing pages of his memoir, the last of his published works, he requires the same from himself. If I were going to understand anything about suffering, Cone writes, rational thinking was not enough. I had to learn suffering from the people who had suffered and overcome. Cone's most defining late work, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, begins where good theology must, in the presence of suffering. He doesn't use the Jacobs categories, but I can easily transpose his content into them. Here it is. Unless the input provided by attention is richly embodied, the output of our proclamation thinking will be thin and inadequate. Theology, the mode of proclamation thinking in which Cohn operates, must originate in fleshly proximity with suffering and marginalized people. Knowing about such people, it's not adequate. Knowing about lacks the embodied contact required for those who follow the way of the incarnate, suffering God of the Christian gospel. The one who steps onto the world maps that Cohn offers, the one who follows his proclamation thinking, finds themselves on a path that leads them close to suffering people, close enough to feel it. Aside from Cohn, few theologians cast a longer shadow over 20th century American Christianity than this guy, Reinhold Niebuhr. Cohn knew his work deeply. He learned from it, especially his theology of the cross. He was willing to say so. Niebuhr was, Cohn acknowledged, genuinely sensitive to the evils of racism, and he addressed the sufferings of African Americans on more than one occasion. Niebuhr was not ignorant. He was not indifferent, or so it seemed. But then came the 1960s. Willie McGee, Emmett Till, M.C. Parker, black men lynched in America. And from Niebuhr, patience, prudence. Cohn couldn't let it stand. Despite all of Niebuhr's writings and speaking about racism, Cohn writes, Niebuhr expressed no madness in his soul, no prophetic outrage against lynching. Even when confronted with the tragedy of the Birmingham bombing, he showed no anger. When Niebuhr wrote against liberalism, pacifism, communism, the easy conscience of American churches, he expressed outrage. But when it came to black victims of white supremacy, he expressed none. Though Niebuhr had eyes to see black suffering, Cohn concluded, Niebuhr lacked the heart to feel it as his own. He had not invested the empathetic effort to step into the shoes of black people and to see the world through the eyes of African Americans. Those are Cohn words. Thus, he could not really feel their suffering as his own. Cohn's lesson about proclamation thinking is this. If the pathway of attention is not richly embodied, the world maps we offer through proclamation will be thin and inadequate. And the Jacobsens would agree. Their exemplar of the attention pathway, Rachel Carson, is deeply empathetic. They write that when attentiveness is directed toward other human beings, it must be reciprocal and respectful. Cohn makes the point even more strongly from within his struggle for the oppressed and the marginalized. The world maps we offer through proclamation thinking are only as good as the embodied attention that feeds them. But there is another test. What does the way that we actually live reveal about the world maps that we travel? For this, I turn to Wittgenstein, and then to Life on the Map with two stories. Part 3, don't think, but look. Proclamation thinking is not merely a map-making endeavor. It beckons for us to step onto our map. And it's there in Life on the Map that our proclamation thinking faces a necessary test. The Jacobsens are right. that proclamation thinkers must welcome critique. Every proclamation exceeds the evidence on which it's based, they write. And the friends who poke and prod are essential traveling companions. I couldn't agree more. But I want to extend their point into a form of testing they haven't fully developed in the book, one that's less conceptual and more richly embodied. Proclamation thinkers need not only friends who illuminate what they can't or aren't willing to see, but they also need the relentless witness of life on the map itself. We need the relentless witness of life on the map itself. What does the way we live reveal about the adequacy of our map and about us? Wittgenstein will help me say more. Many consider Wittgenstein one of the most significant philosophers of the modern era, and his influence on philosophy and theology is vast and ongoing. He wrote the notes. This is amazing. He wrote the notes for his first important work, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, while fighting in the trenches of World War I. And so after the war, he published the work, and then he just stopped entirely. He walked away from philosophy. He sold his inheritance. He became a gardener and a school teacher. Why? He believed that he had solved the problems of philosophy with his approach to logic and language. In the Tractatus, he demonstrates, so he believes, that we represent the world with our language, and that words are true when they correspond with how things really are. Said another way, with language, we make propositions. This thing is this, that thing is that. And when our propositions correspond with how they really are, then our words are true and real. Done and dusted, he believes. So he steps away for nearly 10 years, tends gardens, teaches kids. And then, unexpectedly, he returns to Cambridge and begins overturning the entire thing. Over the course of several conversation-filled years leading seminars at Cambridge, Wittgenstein, he dramatically reworks his earlier thinking. Here's a basic sense of his later philosophy. We can only know what words mean by looking at their use. Or, as he puts it, the meaning of a word is its use in the language. The meaning of language isn't a something that we hold in our minds. Rather, meaning lives in our shared forms of life. To know what a word means for someone, Wittgenstein had come to believe, you have to look at how the word lives in their community. So his imperative is this: don't think, but look. Meaning doesn't live in private mental propositions. This means that. Meaning lives in our shared forms of life. For example, what does the word amen mean? Said to conclude a prayer, it means something profound. But said sarcastically, amen, its meaning is entirely different. And if someone has never participated in its use as part of a worshiping community, does the word mean anything like it does for those who say it together in prayer? For Wittgenstein, we cannot know what words mean apart from their use, and we learn those uses in shared forms of life. We learn the meaning of amen through praying together. What is true of amen is true of every conviction we carry. Meaning lives in use. What Wittgenstein shows us about words is equally true of beliefs. We do not know what we believe until we see what we do, until we watch how our world maps play out in the lives of real people, including our own. Life on the map, I suggest, is itself a test of our proclamation thinking. Two stories will show what I mean. The first test: how we live can reveal the toll of our world map on others. Adrian Black was next in line to lead the white nationalist organization her father had founded, Stormfront. Her godfather, David Duke, was the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, and every person she knew was committed to their cause. Black grew up enmeshed entirely in the proclamation thinking of white nationalism. It made sense of her identity as a white American. It framed her sense of self in relation to non-whites, immigrants, and Jews. It charted a course for Adrian's whole life. And then it all changed. When Black was 18, she left her tightly knit community to attend a small liberal arts college in Florida and found herself in community with those her world map told her to hate. Knowing all about her ties to white nationalism, a Jewish friend named Matthew hosted her every week for Shabbat dinner. Week after week, those meals did their work. Slowly, a painful realization dawned. Her world map was causing harm and violence to those she loved. This is from her memoir, The Klansman's Son. My beliefs were dramatically changing as the pseudoscientific basis for them eroded, but the foundation for the erosion had been the hurt and pain I was causing the community. And this: I'd wanted white nationalism to be wrong for much longer than I'd actually had the arguments to dismiss it. In many ways, the situation had begun the moment I started to care for a community that told me over and over again how much I caused them. White nationalism had an abstract meaning, rational meaning in Black's ideology. But then she saw what those convictions meant for the people across the table, and they took on an embodied meaning they didn't have before. She couldn't unsee it. Now, it's often the case for us that we don't have mirrors close enough that we can see the toll of our beliefs on them, but not so for Black. Encountering the fleshly meaning of her white nationalist map made it impossible to keep traveling it. Adrian didn't only feel that white nationalism was wrong, nor was the dismantling of her map merely rational. Through friendships, through table fellowship, her universe of obligation widened as she learned the toll of her world map. She learned that her beliefs meant on their faces. Seeing that meaning for those she loved made it impossible to hold the map. That's the first test of proclamation thinking. How we live can reveal the toll of our world map on others. The second test is this: how we live can form us into people who can mean what they believe. Some years ago, my family hosted church in our home. 3 weeks of the month, we celebrated our liturgy and our meal, and on the 4th, we served together in a soup kitchen. Prior to those years, I believed, without hesitation or any kind of uncertainty, God cares for the poor. But the shared practices of the soup kitchen showed me that I had not been the kind of person who was able to mean what I believed. My experience over those years wasn't about discovering a truth that I already held privately. No. The practices of being present with those who need food and offering it to them with my own hands formed me into someone who knew with my body what it means to believe that God cares for the poor. The world map that years of thinking as proclamation had formed in me wasn't false before, but it was unfinished because I was unformed. My presence with the poor changed me. I became the sort of person who was able to mean what I believe. Said another way, prior to my years in the soup kitchen, I didn't know what my beliefs meant until my hands learned them. I'll shift in closing to a theological register. The practices of the soup kitchen were pathways for God's formative activity in my life, distinct from rational study. Of course, one can rationally learn the claim God cares for the poor, of course, and God can be active in the learning. But rationality is not embodied practice. And God's agency in enfleshed practice is distinct from rational knowledge acquisition. Certainly, the proof of this is the incarnation. God didn't send a proposition. God sent a person. And the experience of grace doesn't live merely in our minds, but in our bodies as well. The boy on the shore, Sir Raleigh. He didn't file away the sailor's stories. He stepped onto them, and they became his life. That's the image I've been working with. Proclamation thinking offers world maps that are meant to be lived, maps onto which we are beckoned to step. Cone shows us what that demands. The maps we offer through proclamation thinking are only as good as the embodied attention that feeds them. The kind of knowing that comes from proximity to suffering. You can't entirely map what you haven't inhabited. And the lesson, it runs both ways. Life on the map is not only what our proclamation produces, life on the map is also what tests it. Adrienne Black shared a Shabbat table with those her map told her to hate. And those meals did their work. She learned the toll of her ideology on the faces of those she grew to love. And so she discarded the map. My lesson was different. Being with the poor didn't change the perception of my map. It changed me. It brought I've struggled with the way to say this. It brought my feet down onto the map in ways that I couldn't travel it before. The world maps we carry are tested not only by the friends who critique them, not only by their logical coherence, but by the lives they produce, and what those lives reveal about us. My invitation is this. When we step onto our map, look carefully at where it takes us and who we become. Would still love to have your story if possible. It doesn't need to be long. The code is back up on the screen. Thank you for taking even 30 seconds and offering us a story. It's my hope that we'll make those stories available to you after the conclusion of the conference in an email, and it might supplement in some way your thinking about this pathway.